So I'm going to ask Danny a few questions. We're going to have a little bit of a conversation, and then we'll take some of the questions from the audience. And so, Danny, I thought maybe we could start with a question about your filmmaking and how you see it in relation to your still photography. Or is there, maybe there's not a relationship?
Hello. I use stills in the, so that's one thing. I use them because they exist, of these kids, you know. In Willie, I used films of Willie as his childhood, but here I had the still, so I don't think they have much to do with each other. You know, I know when I was younger, and I would look at films, movies, and you know, most of us don't know the names of the cinematographers, even though they're quite famous and renowned in their field. And I'd look at a film, a black and white film, and I'd say, you know, this is better than all the photographers out there. And nobody talks about it at all, you know. And that struck me. And I showed some of my work in Israel, and kids came from all over Israel, which is not a very big place. And they were looking, and one of them said, you know, your pictures, meaning my stills, are very cinematic. I mean, I didn't say that, they said that. And when the prison book was first published, someone tore into it, one of my enemies, who, they're actually myriad, but this guy worked for the New York Times. And he said that my photographs looks like a Busby Berkeley musical, which is a film, actually. Have you ever seen these things?
No.
They have like dancers and they're not nude, these girls, but they'll have like 100 dancers, and it's very arranged and choreographed. And that was a criticism. So I think there is, if you go back to the early pictures, because they were made a long time ago, some of them are very cinematic. And I was probably very taken as a kid watching all these great films in the 50s. So when I made pictures, I made them like, you know, Bad Day at Black Rock or some film that was stuck in my mind that I had forgotten about.
And so would you tell the audience a little bit about the camera that you used for this? I mean, we're calling it a film, but as you pointed out, it's actually, there was no film involved in its making. It's a digital video. It's a digital video.
So right. I have two answers to that. One is Gilles Perez in the audience? Because these people try to find out what kind of, and Susan Mycelis is another one, and there's a whole list of them. They try to find out the name, the actual, you know, say like a Panasonic K1000. And you can just buy one and make a film. It'll look exactly like my film. So I'm not going to. But the other thing is this guy with one eye, who's this just totally wretched creature. He's so wretched, I had trouble. I kept editing him out and just put the minimum in. But I was really just grasping at straws to try to create a scene around Fernie, who just lay there, you know. And this, what he calls a hippie who has one eye. I'm thinking, cool, I got a second person in the frame here. And the guy comes over and he sits down. And I start running. He says, oh, cool, you got a DV cam. And that's what it is. It's a DV cam. So I'm going, you know. What was the question? It's a DV cam, you know.
Well, I was actually more interested in how it was valuable to you.
Terry's trying to write the model. You know, he used to make films, this guy. He's after me, too. He's right up there with Gilles, you know.
I know that it was a very lightweight camera.
Right.
I'm just wondering if there are any of the
technical... Well, you know what had happened? I first started using a digital camera about, I don't remember, about 15 years ago, because I'm a filmmaker and made real films with film in it. And I bought one. you know, and I went through a lot, and I bought a camera, and it's about that big, and I had shoulder surgery, and my arm was in a cast, and it was out of a cast, but it was weak. Anyway, I wanted to upgrade because they're obsolete. They're not high. This is higher definition, what they call 4K. It's like, you know, watching basketball, and you know, compared to how you used to watch it, and it really is better in high definition. So I had this bad arm, and I called up K&M because it's at Kasowitz and His Son and down on Broadway, and I said, you know, I need a camera, and I want to go, you know, I want to step up in the world to get a high definition. And he said, oh, and he's just looking at the screen, and his name's Ross, and he said, oh, here's one. He starts telling me about it, and I think I didn't pay him at the time, although I did end up paying them, but I used to just trade them and get the stuff for nothing. So I, you know, just like, you know, give me that, give me that. Do you know Gavin Newsom has 3 Teslas? 3?
No, I did not know
I think that's bad, as you know, if he wants to be a Democratic candidate. But I'm just picking this free out of a catalog. And I say, well, you know, I broke my arm and I can't hardly move. He said, oh, look at this one. It only weighs a pound. I say, cool, send me that one. And he sends me this thing about this big. And it does great audio, and it's a touchscreen too, which is, and you know, it's not, I mean, in a way it's a quote, a dream come true, because for my entire life making films, which go back to 1969, the tattoo film, which was not mentioned. Who didn't mention it?
I probably left my boss, but I might have left it off the list.
It's my best film.
Oh,
It's my first film. And you need a sound, you had to have a sound person. And in fact, I married Nancy, and she was my sound person. I say, this is great. I mean, she's gorgeous, we're in love, and she can take sound now. I said, here's an Niagara. And I bought her, and Nancy did audio for years until she quit. But we made, you know, many, many films together. And so you have to have a second independent person holding a mic. But you don't with this. And it's a real revelation, because people do have separate people holding mics, but the audio is actually excellent, and so that changes it emotionally. In other words, if Fernie's talking to me or Gloria tells me an amazing story, you don't have to have a second sensitive person there.
Which must change the whole chemistry.
Well, actually, Nancy was a big plus for me because she's much nicer than I am. And most of Willie speaking to Nancy, who is a perfect sound person because she's not noisy like me, or she never, I talk more than the people I'm filming, and I do it constantly.
Well, we're going to come back to that piece. So I want to talk about the symbolism of Trip. So.
Trip,
we see Trip throughout the film in these segments. So first we see him contemplating outside the motel, then we see him sleeping, then we see him exploring and playing in the junkyard, then we see him swimming in nature, sort of having his nature moment. And then at the end, we see him connect with Dennis. A human for the first time. And they have this really beautiful exchange where Dennis gives him something and then Trip gives it back to Dennis.
Right.
And so I wondered if you could talk, I mean, there's this very weighty symbolic significance of Trip, and I wondered if you could talk about that.
He weighs 50 pounds. I don't know, why is it symbolic? He's a dog.
What?
Why is it symbolic?
Well, I mean, because there's a purity to Trip.
That's correct.
Trip is untainted. Trip is unfettered. He is just wholly clear and pure, and so that feels like it has a meaning beyond just your appreciation of him as a companion?
You know, I was thinking coming up that I mean, I talk a lot, and I'm really glad you're showing this film. And by the way, we showed it in New York. You know, it looked much better here, Nancy, and it didn't have a ghost, and it didn't have problems with the color, which we had all of those problems in New York City, which was, and you know, when we did 16 millimeter, we'd run up and say it's out of focus and scratching the print. But this is a fucking nightmare, this stuff, I think, because they start, I mean, all of it is. But anyway, Trip is an Australian Shepherd, and we had no dog trainers on the set, nor is he a professional. And so this is a borderline miracle that he did anything. I don't know if you're dog people out there, you know what an Australian Shepherd is like, but basically they spend 90% of the time staring at you, which you don't want your subject to do. And they're called Velcro because they just stay right next to you, which makes them completely unfilmable. So all of these scenes were, it's amazing just to get him away from me, not staring at me, he doesn't look at the camera, and he hated water because he almost drowned as a little child, little puppy. And so I'm really proud of him. I loved it. I think I love not having humans around. And I'm in love with that rock, too, which is another weird thing to talk about. If you want to talk about the rock.
Maybe later.
It's quite a rock, though, isn't it?
It is quite, it's a whole bunch of rocks.
That's a real rock. You know, it's not one of these things Richard Sierra makes or whoever's making rock. That's a real rock, and we don't know how long it's been there either. You know. Artists make rocks. They actually make them out of paper mache or whatever they make them. They're phony. But that's a real rock, and it's just lying there.
We'll come back to the rock.
Well, I'm making that famous. I think someday there's going to be a little plaque there. I mean, I'll be dead, but you may not be. Although you know, no young people come to these showings. I don't want to insult you because Bernie's laughing, but we're among the older people. I just appeared at Brown University, and I thought, wow, in Providence, and they had it, and I wrote this really wild, radical thing, how they should shut down the school and they were going to save the world. And I was going to read it, and then I looked around, there were no students at all. It was just old people, like at a Bob Dylan concert. And I thought, well, that's my core group, you know. I shouldn't make any jokes about them. But let me talk about the rock.
Well, no, actually, I'm going to go even better than that. Yeah. I'm going to one-up you on the rock. Let's talk about the cemetery.
Uh-oh.
Yeah. So I'm interested in the relationship between the cemetery and the junkyard.
You know, I've made, I think, 5 or 6 films. That's called The Lady of the Sorrows. A beautiful name. And it's in Bernalillo. And I used to want to be buried there. And I don't think I'll be buried there, but I've made about 6 films there and photographs there, but because it's close and it's an amazing. It's right in the corner of the interstate, and that was Christmas Eve, and Dennis Montoya is a good friend and a neighbor, and he was putting out candles for everyone in his family. And it was probably dark when that was shot because I had met someone I had to talk to, and he just happened to be there. And it was Daryl Flukes, and I have a problem with it. Anyway, I start talking to him, and next thing I know, it's like dark, and I can't find Dennis, and I run in there, and this digital stuff works. You know, it's like these phones. They take pictures in the dark.
Yeah. But so we see Dennis walking around
the auto grave. Yeah, well, they call them auto graves.
Yeah. Oh, well,
but
yeah.
they're really recycle centers. And Breaking Bad already shot a scene in that one. And it would really kill me because I thought, fuck, I'm finished now. Because they did a great job with Breaking Bad. But they also sucked up every possible place to shoot anything within 100 miles of Albuquerque, including this place is called Pay and Pull. And the deal is, they search you going in or they search you coming out. I want to point out with pride that you're not supposed to have a camera in there. You're not supposed to have a dog at the fairgrounds. You're not supposed to make films in a casino. And you're not to make make films of your dog in the other graveyard. So all of these things were done clandestinely without permission of the owners. That's where this little camera comes in. And I go, Trip, run, get in there, and get behind the car, and I'll join you later.
Well, it just struck me there's an interesting parallel about, you know, the dead bodies and the dead cars, and
Right.
and you know, we hear about Johnny who died in a car crash.
That's such a sad story.
At 23, and we see, you know, when you're in the car graveyard, we see smashed in windshields,
That's
and you sort of
correct.
think about all of the stories behind each of these junked vehicles, and sort of imagine a corollary in, well, I did, in the graveyard. Although it's interesting to me that in the car graveyard there were more people than there were in the actual graveyard. You know, we just have Dennis.
Living people.
Living
Well, they don't put you, it's illegal to bury someone who's alive. It
Yeah,
is
no,
in New
we-
Mexico.
we-
I don't.
Yeah, no, we don't do that in Arizona either.
You're talking about visiting people.
Visiting.
Visit.
I'm
Yeah.
talking
Well,
about
didn't-
living people.
I wasn't interested in the people. But, you know, it's a very, I'm wondering why am I making, this is a very dark film, actually. And we're in a very dark time, to put it mildly. And I think the desert was a subject to me, and so was the end of civilization and climate change. And so I always have seen these, you know, I have another film with I did a series called The Pits, and I did things like demolition derbies. And of course, America did, you know, the American cars of the 50s were some of the greatest things ever made by mankind, things of beauty. I mean, they were amazing, you know, and that's why we love old Chevys. They are truly magnificent things. And of course, we now know that we may be destroying life on Earth just by driving around. You know, I also write for the New York Review of Books daily, and most of that's about climate change. And I did something about Nancy Has a Bolt, and there's a long piece about that. That's a plug-in, 100% electric car. So this is a very dark film, and I think these images is an image of the end of the world. I mean, whatever happens, we'll never get rid of that stuff. And there are two water graveyards in it. One is near Farmington, and that's an incredible one because it covers about 100 acres. It's just massive and into gullies and all stuff. On the other hand, there are recycle centers. You know, these people go in there and not buying new cars that are being made. They're fixing their cars, which is a noble thing.
So this notion that the film is dark, I found myself at the end wondering whether the commentary was on this group of people that you've been following for a long period of time.
The Haremios.
The Haremios, who feel like they've been, so I struggled with the wording for this. Have they been left behind? Have they been
because
left
you're
out?
afraid you'll be exposed and lose your job.
No, I'm not. No,
Well,
no.
it's worse. Willie's nephew's out there.
Right.
And he's
That may
going
be
to fix your ticket. The Haremios are very nice to me, and they're very nice people, actually. You know, when I came to New Mexico with all my famous photography behind me, in fact, I've been writing about that, and I was really walking away from this kind of stellar career as this young photographer. And I got there around 1970, so all the pictures, you know, of my work had been done already, and I was like turning my back on it. And when I got to Sandoval County and I kind of looked around, about which I knew very little, but there's not that much to know about Sandoval County because there are only 4 roads in it, I thought, well, this is like Faulkner, because Faulkner, a photography book had been done on Faulkner called Yucca County or something. It was a photo book. And I don't know if that was the right word, but Faulkner lived in Oxford, and he lived in a part of Mississippi. And as I understand it, many or most of the things he wrote about were about things right there in his yard, that people he knew, et cetera, et cetera. And I thought, I can do that here in Llanito. and in a way, I did it, you know, and I spent decades away, but we always came back, and we've come back now. But I never connected back east the way I did with the West and that community and all of it, you know.
Well, so as I thought about this group of people who feel left aside, I wondered if this film is your commentary on the way they've been left aside, or is it more that your commentary is on how readily they seem to accept this tragedy that, I mean, you sound incredulous. You know, there are 2 murders and a double drowning. Doesn't that seem problematic to you?
You know that there are many, well, yes and no. So Nancy and I lived on a farm in Ulster County, which is the Hudson Valley, and Robert De Niro lived 10 miles away. And someone on Thanksgiving came to had a Thanksgiving dinner, was a mile from the house. He killed 2 people, right? I think the turkey was undercooked or something went wrong. But it's remarkable how many murders there are. They just, people murder each other. And I did a film called Murderers, which I love. And everyone in it has murdered, you know, a number of people. And they're all people I knew well enough that I could sit and chat to. And this one guy, Pinky, who had been on death row but was spared, and so he was doing a life sentence, he looks at the camera and says, anybody can murder someone. It was just, and he said, totally, he looks like a college kid or something. He's not, but he says it's just the circumstances. So, I mean, that's about the murders, but yeah, there were a lot of murders there. I was stunned. I knew Joseph pretty well. Someone murdered him. He was adopted. And these other 2 I didn't know anything about. That murder was, you know, 400 yards from my house. And I'm writing about, you know, there was, I don't really want to get into the murders, but you're talking about the people in the film as if they were different from us, you know. And what's the word you use? Because you had trouble using the word.
Yeah, left aside,
yeah.
Left behind.
Or you said, why don't, but you said something else, like, why don't they do something, or do they care, or something like that?
No, it's that I wondered if your commentary was about the sort of tragedy of their experience, or how, well, so for instance, when Janice says, the doctor asked me if there was any trauma, but I mean, I was being beat up all the time, but there was no trauma.
Right.
You know, so there's this like acceptance or, you know, I mean, maybe it just is that if you're in that circumstance all the time.
She's kind of remarkable, isn't she, Janice?
Oh, that was an amazing
So I fell in
scene.
love with Janice. I mean, I tend to fall in love literally with the people filming. I mean, I care about them. And I had never met Janice. And Gloria, who I knew, I've known Gloria, and Nancy has also, since she was like 20, and she was a knockout, and I go back to see her, and there she is. And she tells her just a heartbreaking story about giving up a child who she never finds. And she invites her daughter over to meet me, because I'm kind of a star in the family, because I made this film, Willie, about the brother, and they love the film. And in the, in the modern age, you know, they can get it on a DVD, and they have it, and they show it, et cetera, which is actually very nice. Anyway.
And actually, I'd like to mention to the audience, they can see it online.
On Vimeo.
On Vimeo.
For free.
So you can actually watch Willie, which is the, you know, the movie that precedes this one.
We can, you can see any of my films for free on your iPhone when you're bored at dinner, or you can see it. You can stream them on, just put my name in, and Vimeo, and all these films are there, and you can see any of them, and which is nice because it's hard to see these things. And so Janice is invited over, and I think, well, this is great. Janice is going to be my next Willie. She's great. I mean, she's never met me, and she's telling me about psychiatrists and that she needs a psych, and her mother needs it, and she's great. And she's eloquent and intelligent and talkative. I thought, great, this is perfect. I got a female Willie, and I'll make a film about her. And Janice actually lived about I mean, this is in the end of the very edge of Albuquerque, where it's just like the moon after that. They're on the last street of the last division. But she lived, you could walk from her mother's house to her house. It was a quarter mile away. And she was never home. She never answered the phone. And I never saw her again. Even though I endlessly pursued her, and I came home and I said, this is a star, this is great, I found this Janice. And the same thing with the boy. This guy Vito was her son. He was there at this murder, did 10 years in prison. He had just gotten out, and he lived closer to me, and I could never answer, So it was difficult. So that's when I used the dog, The dog scenes. It was such a relief to be with this. The Haremiers are compulsive talkers, and they're nuts. And when you really love a dog, and you come out and you see him in the morning, I mean, there is these moments. I hope this is not me, but I think this is a universal human phenomenon. And you're wondering, like, is he going to talk? Or how come he can't talk? Or why doesn't he ever actually say anything to me? He never said anything. He's a perfect companion. Okay, questions?
I have some questions from the audience.
Incredible.
The interaction seems so spontaneous. Were they all first takes? Or how did you encourage the characters to stay so real?
Well, I think that's a good question because they are spontaneous. And I think part of the power of these films is that they're real, and they're real. I don't know how else. These moments, my favorite moment is the teapot going off, because that is an incredible example of the power of this realism, which I believe in, that you can't buy. Another thing is there's a dust storm. What Dennis is a mechanic, and he needed parts for his mother's car. So that's real. And we go to this auto thing, and I sneak the camera in, and I follow Dennis around. I say things like, don't look at the camera and this and that. But then there's a New Mexico dust storm with like smashing and 60 mile an hour winds that comes out of nowhere. It was perfect. And the dancing of so that's all real and spontaneous. And then this dancing is actually a rehearsal. It's quite private. It's a religious thing, and they don't want to be filmed. And it was a privilege that they know me and they let me do it. I filmed that over 4 days, and it rained every day, which I loved. And I cut it so it actually looks like it's raining. But yeah, those are real people talking to me. And when it's the real magic is that's just, I mean, it can be a reflection or motion or just somebody saying something. It can be a very little thing. And when it's in focus and everything is right, that's the most gratifying thing about doing this stuff.
So this question says, Dear Danny, why did you go back to Fernie? And then secondarily, how much footage did you shoot? How much time did you spend?
My films had very low ratios. I know when I did The Abandoned Children, because we flew to Colombia and we took whatever it was, 40 rolls of film or something. And when we were done, we had a ratio of 1 to 10, meaning the film was, if the film was 2,000 feet long, we had shot 20,000 feet of film. And so that's the ratio. But I've been told that other people have ratios of 1 to 100 in this kind of work. And can I make fun of my peers who are no longer with us, like Mary Ellen Mark, for instance? She died. And she's a wonderful photographer. But she would weigh her film. They're bringing so much film from a shoot. They just have this big bag full of film. So I shoot very little. I mean, the whole prison thing I did on like 150 rolls of film. In the Civil Rights Movement, which took a couple of years, I shot less than 200 rolls of film. I think I have all the contacts of everything I ever did, and I'm at number 2,000. Which means since I was a little baby till now, I've shot 2,000 rolls of 35 millimeter film. So I'm very judicious about turning the camera on. The trouble with video is it's not film, it's free, And you tend to use it like a tape recorder, which is totally different experience, meaning like you turn it on and leave the room like you're Andy Warhol, you know. Anyway, so that's a problem really, because it's much better when you're under pressure, and et cetera.
And why did you go back to Fernie?
Well, because I couldn't find Janice.
Fair
Well, I
enough.
like Fernie. You know, Robert, I don't like to talk about Robert Frank too much, but you know, he had made a wonderful film called Me and My Brother, and it was about Orlovsky's brother who was mentally ill, and he never talked. And there's a whole film about this guy. But you know, Robert used fiction, and Sam Shepard helped him, and all kinds of people helped him. You know, because he made very different films than I made. But Fernie is, you know, it's kind of amazing because, on the one hand, Fernie is a totally repulsive person. You don't really want to be around Fernie. And when I got involved with Occupy, I met a lot of homeless people, because if you actually went to these camps, like, you know, 20–30% of the people in the camps were real homeless people, the kind of people you avoid, you cross the street, you give them money, and they smell bad. And I got to know some homeless people. It was quite an experience, because, you know, like this guy on death row said, it could happen to any of us, you know, because we hear these stories. Some of these people are totally ordinary people. Anyway, I like this intimacy and this affectionate footage of a guy who can't even talk. He talks in a kind of special language. But I became convinced that if you paid attention, he started to make sense, as opposed to talking gibberish. And so you can actually understand. He says totally coherent things. He says he's 54 years old. He says at one point he did it to himself by sniffing glue. And he says he liked Bernalillo because of cigarette. So this is a guy who's under medication. So I like that, you know. I don't know if I'd like to see someone else's film on this subject, but I'd like to make it. And it's supposed to be dark, and it's supposed to be difficult. And the true fuck-ups are the universe of us, because the world is ending, and we're sitting here watching the Danny Lyon film.
Fair enough. Another question is, what were your breakthrough events that got you serious recognition?
Well, you know, being in the civil rights movement was a very good thing, and I was very young. And once, when around 1970, I was 28, I think, I appeared at the University of Chicago, and I asked to speak in an auditorium where I had been as a student, because Hans Morgenthau used to lecture in it. And we showed my tattoo film, the one you didn't mention, which is probably my best film. And it's called Social Sciences 127, which was the name of the classroom that I was now appearing in, only I had gotten a number wrong. It was actually 122, but I'd named the film after this classroom where I had sat as a student listening to Hans Morgenthau and other lecturers. And so I was back there, and the place was packed, and an African American, and I think he was in a robe, like, you know, an African robe, like a nationalist, or, well, that's a bad word now, a Pan-Africanist. What's the word, Bernie? Help me out here. You don't know, he doesn't know. What? What?
He's wearing a robe.
A robe, yeah, but it was an African robe, because he would, you know, people believed in Africa, you know. So, and he said, he put his hand up and he said, didn't SNCC put you on the map? Which is the question, meaning, wasn't it my participation in the civil rights movement that made me famous? Which was true, by the way. And Hugh Edwards was sitting right there, and Hugh Edwards had crutches and was he was a curator, which is what Becky is, at the Art Institute of Chicago, and he had given me 2 shows and really been a mentor. And I said, no, Hugh Edwards put me on the map. So, but the civil rights movement made me famous. I was a kid, you know. And then I walked away from that, you know. They had other things to do.
So we have one last question, which I'm gonna,
I like questions.
well, I know, it's been fun. So the audience member's question was, what was the purpose of the film? And I'd like to tag on to that.
Yeah, tack something on.
Who is the wanderer?
Who is the
Because-
wanderer?
Because it
It's
seems
like Jeopardy or something?
No, if it was Jeopardy, then you would answer, who is the wanderer?
I would just, yeah?
Right.
Okay,
yeah.
who is the wanderer?
Who is the wanderer? Or what was the purpose of the film?
You know, Gavin Brown is a cool guy, and he's my dealer, gallerist back in East. And he said it's a dog, right? Terry, what do you think? We want to get you're the photo guy, he's the art guy. He said it's a dog, right?
The dog is the wanderer?
Well, the dog does wander around. I love that. You know, I love the idea that this dog, you know, dogs really get into it. I mean, if you watch a dog, look, I'm not joking here, but I love exploring, obviously, and I've moved around a lot. I love discovering things. I hate tours. I hate being led around by anybody. I want to discover for myself. And dogs are not only like right there on the ground, but they smell everything, and they're supposed to have like incredible. So I just love that in dogs. So when he's looking around all these places, he is a wanderer. But you know, there's also the wandering Jew, which is I'm Jewish, and it's been used. I think, you know, there are no original titles, and you can't copyright them for that reason. So I think we're all wanderers. I'm glad I'm alive. I'm glad civilization still exists, and I think we should all. I wrote something called "Kill the Koch brothers," in quotes, but I heard one of them's dying, which shows there is justice in the world. But that still leaves a brother. We're all wanderers.
All right. Can we all thank Danny Lyon for this evening?
Thank you. Thanks for inviting me. I mean it.
I'm so glad you could come.
That was a lot of fun. Thank you for coming.